Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Love for a Lifetime podcast. I'm Chris. This is my wife, Brooke, and we're here with Sean and Lauren today talking about some marriage topics. And we want to kick off talking a little bit about communication and conflict. And to get us started out, I'm going to go real hard here right away, and I'm going to read James 4. And it says, "What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this that your passions are at war within you? You desire, you do not have, so you murder, you covet, you cannot obtain, so you fight and you quarrel." So we know we quarrel a lot, and unfortunately sometimes we fight and quarrel in our marriages. I want to start out and talk about what kind of things, you guys fight and quarrel about.
Oh, wow.
You name it. We had some people at church call it intense fellowship.
Yeah.
So we're gonna start to lighten the mode of fighting,
yeah.
right? Our words have power, so we want to call it intense fellowship.
Intense fellowship. So what drives you towards that fellowship?
Well, we talk about communication first, I think, and that's where we get to. A lot of our communication is ultimately what might cause fights, and it's how we communicate, how we talk to each other, what our verbal language is, and our physical, how we look at each other, how we're sitting. I think those are really important things to identify. So, I like to talk about, when we talk about communication, I like to start off, and it's not just about how we talk and how we communicate. It's about how we communicate here. And I know in one of our other podcasts, we talked a lot about prayer. If you're praying, if you're seeking the Lord, He is going to fill you with what you need to get through some of the conflict and things that you're going to inevitably have in your marriage. I think it's ultra important to develop that communication with God. Not only talking to Him and telling your problems, but being silent, listening. Let Him tell you what you need to do. Let Him fill your heart with what He wants to tell you about yourself. That verse said we're all selfish. So you're selfish. You're selfish. I'm selfish. So we're going to have problems until we start to really dive into that selfishness, see where it comes from. Why do we have it? Start to understand one another. And then we can really start to communicate together much more effectively. But I think if we let God in the middle of our relationship, it helps this so much more. So I think that's the communication part that I always like to lead off with, is communicate with God first. And then this just gets easier.
Yeah.
So we conflict. Well, our conflict has gotten a lot less, I think.
We were
over the
absolutely
years.
the worst
We
two
were
people on the
pretty
planet
bad.
at communication
Yeah.
and dealing with conflict. And so that's why God led us to teach conflict and communication to premarital people so that we would learn about ourselves.
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
You learned by
Sean-
teaching, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, Sean would, when we would get in fights, I'm a withdrawer and he's a escalator, and those two don't really work well because the withdrawer tries to find a safe space and hide under something, and the escalator wants to find that person and devour them.
Because I have one more thing to tell you. I need to tell you one more thing.
I can just picture this.
Yeah.
You're chasing her around the house.
So, yeah, we had a house where you could go around, like a roundabout, and literally I could not get away. He would just follow me, and I'd be like, please stop talking, and he would just keep talking.
I had
One more point.
that
One
needed
more
to be
point.
heard.
So yeah, we were pretty train wreckish at first, and learned to really pray through and depend on God. I remember one time we got in a massive argument. Again, you never remember what your argument's about because they're really not that important in light of eternity. But we got in a massive argument. He wouldn't leave me alone, so I went and locked myself in the closet. And I had just recently watched that movie War Room. And so I already had lots of scriptures all over the walls, and I just started claiming scripture, and I started telling the enemy to leave. And I was just like, God, you got to help. I can't, this has gotten out of control. Actually he came in the room not too long after, and he had, when he would get up amped, it was amped. You couldn't take it down. Okay. He was I'm raging fire. And,
Wow.
well, it's true. You're not like that anymore. Thank you, God.
She's telling you you're smoking hot. Sean.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's what I'm hearing too. Communication.
Maybe that's not what she meant.
So anyway, he comes into the room and he's like, were you praying for me? And he was so softened and like this, he was like totally just that anger and that frustration were just stripped from him. And he was like, were you praying for me? And like, he knew that I was battling because it left him. And it was the coolest thing to see. And we share that story a lot with our merged couples.
And it was chaos. Like the way that I felt in those moments was this chaos. And all of a sudden I just had this moment of clarity, and it was really weird. And that's when I knew she had to have been praying, because this was something new. We were trying to battle the enemy, trying to battle the lies and the anger. Anger was a stronghold that I really dealt with.
Yeah. God's really, really removed that from him. But yeah, so you know, we had some major fights. I mean, major. But you know, a lot of the times they included kids because we're a blended family. So that was mainly what we fought about. Now I know that a lot of other people, we tend to be on the same page on a lot of other things, which I'm very thankful for. But of course, you know, I know there's lots of things people fight about: finances, expectations, in-laws and family members. I mean, raising children, which is really our issue, what we really struggled with. Even sexual intimacy, people, you know, fight over. So
well, those are some of the big marriage killers. And I think that, you know, if we don't talk about those and start to communicate about those, and I think that's what we do in Merge, is just open the door to these couples that are going to get married and say, here's some things you need to ask one another. How many kids are you going to have? You know, what kind of school are you going to put them in? Just questions that you got to start getting on the same page. Whose house are we going to for Christmas? You know, are we going to your parents, my parents? Or are we going to make our own? You know, you have to start really delving into that stuff as you get married. Or if you're already married and you're already dealing with those things, you might need to go back and revisit some of those things that are causing stresses. Finances, you know, you guys do a really good job with finances. And
yeah, what would you guys say is your main conflict issue?
Well, I think it's interesting as you kind of go through that list, because, right, there's sometimes just a lot of mundane things that if you're not communicating well in terms of expectations, it could be simple things like she's expecting me home at a certain time for dinner because she's preparing something, or maybe somebody is coming over to the house, right? And I'm late and I don't communicate that to her, right? That creates tension with a lack of expectation. Or maybe it's the weekend and it's a Saturday and I'm thinking I'm going to go run Saturday morning, and then, you know, there's a particular game I want to watch at 2:00 maybe, but she maybe has a different idea about what she wants to do that day. And that's one of the things we struggle with. Sometimes it's just not communicating simple things even, right? Our expectations for the day or the week even.
Yeah, we've kind of learned to say that, like, especially Saturday mornings. Okay, what are your thoughts for today? What are you expecting? So at least we're starting the day off trying to be aligned with what we're going to do that day. Because, lots of times it is those little things.
And they add up, right?
They do.
They add up. And I think the thing that we've struggled in our marriage is that, again, can be a lot of little mundane things. A lot of times, you know, both of us will be withdrawers and we'll just push it down and kind of ignore it. But I know for me, what happens is, you know, if I say, oh, I'm being silly, that's not important, and I push it away, well, it has a risk of building up, right? One thing, another thing, another thing. And then eventually I can get very frustrated. It can boil over.
No, it's like a volcano erupting, actually.
And you're bringing up stuff that's like 2 weeks, 2 weeks in hiding under that lava.
Let's just keep it. I guess it is.
Yeah, it is. And I had to realize that that's not good, right? I wanted to push down my feelings and my preferences or expectations. And one of the things I had to learn to do to talk about feelings was, I often say to Brooke, I might say, hey, I kind of feel this is silly, but I need to say it, right? I feel silly. I don't want to say it, but I'm going to tell you that, hey, you said something last week. We were talking to Sean and Lauren, and I thought it was belittling or it hurt my feelings. And it's not a big deal, but I at least want to let you know that, hey, I didn't appreciate it.
And he's gotten really good at doing that. And what helps with that is that when he starts it by acknowledging that it might sound silly, then automatically I am not on the defensive because I'm like, I'm going to agree with him. This probably will be sounds silly to me or whatever. But it's been such a healthy way for him to acknowledge, but like get it out, then we can talk about it. Because oftentimes he'll say that I said something that like upset him or caught him off guard, or like the other night, honestly, at home group, it was a prayer request. And I was like, I had no idea that it hurt you or made you feel like it never occurred to me that would make you feel the way it made you feel. So it's helpful to hear that also in a way that he's not attacking me.
I think the approach, right? The approach of how you're going to deal with those things is really important. And, you know, we can go into depth about how you talk, when you talk, what are some guidelines you can do, or some safe places that you can feel safe enough in your relationship. I know in the beginning of our relationship, she didn't feel safe to tell me stuff because I would instantly get defensive. And that didn't really create a great line of communication. And it wasn't fair to her to be like, gosh, I'm walking on eggshells. I don't even know how to bring this up because I know he's going to get mad. And so, you know, I think you started doing kind of a similar thing. Hey, I've got to, you know, not do you promise not to get mad, because that's just not going to work.
Right. Yeah.
But hey, I got something to talk about. Are you in the right place to talk about this right now? And if I said no, not right now, she would wait. And then I would, at that point, try to get myself in a position where I knew I could control, self-control and those kind of things. And like I said, God's removed so much of that. He's blessed me with the anger stuff, and we communicate so much better.
I think it's great though to point out that timing, right?
Yeah, timing is very important.
Timing's important, right? If you're, what do they say? If you're hungry or you're tired or you're lost, that's probably not a good time to get into a deep conversation. I like what you talked about. And we have some friends that we know do this. They set a check-in point each week that they get together, and they kind of have a list, and they both know they're getting together. You know, they got 30 minutes each week where they're going to get together and say, hey, was there anything I did last week that hurt your feelings or caught you off guard or upset you? You know, so they're very intentional about it. So they both know that, hey, that's a time where we can talk about
I like that because it allows you to have mental preparation going into that if you need to.
As well.
Right? To know that this might not be an easy conversation. I don't know what I did. I may have done something. And not be on the defensive, just to go in and say, okay, I'm ready to process whatever this is. I think I love that.
Yeah. It's also a great time to just say what you appreciated too.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes he'll do something and not know I appreciate it, and vice versa. And it's important to articulate both of those things.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
We also have some friends who go on like a quarterly retreat, just like a weekend, and they like evaluate their marriage. And then they like really, pray over it, and they goal set and kind of like and I think it's important to, sit back sometimes and evaluate, like, where are we in our marriage? Like, how do you feel? Like, are you, do you feel like I'm respecting you well? As husbands really need that respect, and wives really need that love. Evaluating and really being able to talk about the vulnerable things, and be real with one another, and like, how do you feel about our sex life? I mean, those are things that need to be talked about. And a lot of times we just scooch past them because they're uncomfortable, right? Because we live in a world where we try not to be uncomfortable, right? Everything's about comfort,
but then we don't grow.
And that you just it's not sustainable. It's not, and it will eventually you'll see that wreaking in havoc in your marriage.
And I love, because what you're saying is applicable to any married couple. And I think it's so important. And I wish, well, no regrets, but like there's so much we know now. I wish we had known 30 years ago going into this. But like, having young kids is not an excuse to not do that. Yeah. There's still a way to get away. And maybe you can't get away for a whole weekend at that point, but can you get away for an afternoon? Or can it be an overnight? And if you don't prioritize your marriage, nobody else will. And it's just that intentionality is so important. And if you even have a guide of, these are the things we're going to talk about. I mean, generally, like, then the expectation is there. And maybe it's hey, the phones are going to be away. Yes. And like set the expectations up front. So when you get there, you know what to expect, and you can have a really honest conversation. But
And
throughout marriage,
Right.
like little kids to empty nesters,
yeah.
like that's so important.
Right.
And
right.
generally, there's a topic that you'll find over and over in your relationship that you fight about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
With us, it's kids. With
With
other
us, it's
people,
sex.
with you, it's sex. So it's like, if that expectation is set going into a meeting like that, then you can't be like, well, I didn't know we were going to talk about this. I don't really want to talk about it, because it's really easy to avoid the big issue, because you know it creates conflict, and you've both learned to put up a wall about that topic. And I think if you set a time to go into it, you both come into it knowing, okay, we're gonna take this head on, and we're gonna pray. We're gonna ask God to reveal whatever He wants to reveal in our hearts, and then we're gonna start to discuss it. And if things get heated, we're gonna pray again. And until you've done that, until you've prayed in the middle of a fight, it seems foreign and awkward. So I would really encourage talking about these things when you're in the right headspace. I love the planning for it, because it's not when something got heated, now you're talking about it and you're already at this level whereas you can come together saying, I know we have topics, I know we can work it out, I trust you enough to know that you're going to be honest with me, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know, I think that's where every marriage needs to get to. And it's not always easy, you know, we're not there, we still struggle with certain things, but we've learned to forgive quicker, we've learned to get over them quicker, we've learned to go to God quicker, so you know, those kind of things help.
Kind of reminds me of that Love and War book where John Eldridge talks about that. Like he's like, if there's a topic that keeps coming up in your marriage that you guys are having issues with, then you've just walked into the enemy's campground. You know, that's where he's working. You know, and so we need to be aware. You know, we need to be aware that the enemy is out to come and kill, steal, and destroy. Right.
And especially our marriage.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Especially when we talked about in a previous podcast that our marriage is supposed to reflect the love of God for His church. So if He can divide our marriage, He can show people that one marriage is a joke and your God's a joke. And that's what He's trying to do. And so we have to really know that when you said, I'm not your enemy, or he's not my enemy. If you can do that in the middle of a fight, and it's so good, it's helped us tremendously.
Powerful.
It's powerful. And it really puts you back into that mindset where you can take control of that thought and that action and say, you know what, you're not my enemy. I love you. I know what's happening now.
Yeah, Brooks had to literally tell me that on a few occasions. Had to remind me, right? In the middle of the discussion, hey, I'm not your enemy. And you're right, it does really, really reset your mind on, okay, wait a minute, what's happening out here? He's trying to divide us and destroy us, and we need to reunite and be one to overcome that. Right? Can't do it alone. We need to be one to do it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of challenging topics, and you guys have known us well for a long time. And we mentioned earlier, like one of the things we've really struggled with is just sexual intimacy in our marriage. Right? I've always had a high sex drive, and Brooke has had a lower sex drive, shall I say?
Lower than yours.
Lower than mine.
Sometimes very low, but yeah. As is usually the case. Very few couples have the same match in that area.
And I think that's actually a good point. Whether you start out, you think you're very aligned, but eventually, you know, that for the one who has a higher sex drive, it may never align, never match up. But it's something that we don't talk about a lot, right? People are kind of taught, don't talk about sexual intimacy in your marriage, and it's something we, even as a couple, had to learn to talk about. But it's one of those things that you have to bring it into the light, right? And so having a structured way where you come together in your marriage and say, hey, you know, let's talk about how are we doing in our marriage? How are we doing on raising kids? How are we doing on our finances and how we spend money? How are we doing in meeting each other's love languages? And even the sexual intimacy part of our marriage is something you've got to be willing to talk about and bring it into the light.
And I think one thing that I still will struggle with, but I'm working on, is just being forthcoming. And I think what I love about this idea of if you have a set time when you know you're going to talk about stuff, that opens that door. Because sometimes it's really hard to bring up a topic, especially if it's something you're feeling insecure about or not sure how he's going to respond or whatever. But if you know this is a safe time to talk about it, but then you have to be forthcoming and you have to share, even if it feels uncomfortable to share whatever. And yeah, that's one area where looking back over our years, that's been a struggle. And
I think that probably goes back to expectations. Had you guys in the beginning of your marriage, when things were maybe a little different than you expected them to be, is to say, hey, I'm expecting 7 days a week, and you're expecting, 1 day, right? And then it's like,
8 days a week. What do
well,
you mean?
exactly. Exactly. But, I think setting those expectations early. So if we can really encourage anybody to really start to talk about those things, the uncomfortable things, the things that are causing problems in your marriage. For guys, when we maybe don't get sex, we feel rejected. And that rejection may stem back to something else where we weren't good enough for our dads or our coaches or whatever it was, right? And then that starts to bring back up old baggage, old things, and then we feel a rejection. And then that kind of puts up a divide. And it's not that you intended to do it. It's not that, it's just kind of how our baggage manifests itself. And the enemy says, see, you're not good enough. Or whatever those things are you've probably dealt with your whole life. That may be it for you. For me, it was rejection. And she learned, we talked about it pretty early on. And she learned, instead of saying no, or I'm not interested, or no, whatever, it was not right now, but we will later. And she always honored the later. And I think that was ultra important for me to not feel rejected. And that changed kind of that dynamic in our relationship that could have gone the wrong way. And it really helped us.
Again, I think it all stems at communication. If you can get past that uncomfortableness and start really talking about it and saying, okay, well, when you feel like this, if I approach you like this, does that work for you? Like kind of figuring out what would work in those types of situations. But you really can't unless you start the conversation. You really can't get there until you start talking about it, us talking about like, that makes me feel rejected. Well, I wouldn't have known that, and then talking about, okay, well, if I were to say this, does that make you feel, so like, again, just conversations are communication on these types of topics are just important.
And I think that the term that we usually use is mutual understanding. And it just sounds like a word, but the reality is that I have to understand where she's coming from when she says no. I'm tired. I don't feel good. Had a long day. I can't just go, well, this is what I want, right? That's our selfishness in marriage. I want this. I want this. She doesn't feel good. She doesn't feel right. She's not intimately close. I haven't been a loving husband to her for a week, and now I want to have sex, and she feels very disconnected. So those are things that we have to start to understand about one another and be vulnerable enough to say, hey, why? Right? It's just because I'm sick. It's just because I'm tired. Or I haven't felt very close to you. She's safe enough now to say, I haven't felt very close to you. You've been frustrated at the kids or work or the news or all the things that kind of rile me up. And then I have to take a step back and go, I really haven't done that. And then let me go help in the kitchen. Let me go help wherever I can help.
I think that's a great point, right? Because as you said, when you've rejected from men, you don't feel respected, you don't feel needed. But I think I also had to learn that, hey, wait a minute, I have a part in this. I need to make sure I'm connecting to her and addressing her love language, because her love language is different than mine, right? I got to make sure that I'm affirming her and building her up and letting her know how important she is to me, right? So I have a piece in this. I have a piece in this interplay that I've got to do a better job at as well, so that then together we're more successful in our marriage.
And the other thing that came to mind as you were talking is, it sounds stupid, but we cannot read each other's minds. Yeah. And I still think he should at times.
I know.
But he can't. And, I think we have so much.
I'm wrong 50% of the time.
And we have so much that's happening in our brains that I think we just kind of assume the other person just knows.
Or you've been around me long enough,
Right. And they don't. And there's still sometimes we're in bed and I'm like, well, do you want to do something tonight or not? I don't know. The signals aren't real clear. And I've learned if I don't ask him, I'm just going to be frustrated or he's going to be frustrated. And it's not, there's nothing sexy about that question, but it's just very direct. We've been together a long time now. But you're not, whatever the topic is, you're not going to read each other's minds. Yeah. And you might think you do, but it still doesn't hurt to say, hey, just to make sure I'm jiving with you. Is this what you mean? Or is this what you're feeling? Or if not, or what are you feeling? Or, I think it's good to ask. And back to communication, communicate.
Well, I think we could probably go on and on about this topic, but that's probably good for today.
We decided we weren't going to talk about sex, but I feel like every time we talk about communication and conflict, a lot of it's around sex, and a lot of the divorce stuff stems from sex problems and miscommunications and rejections and all those things, and not feeling loved, not feeling respected, and they all kind of come back to that.
And I'm gonna say one more thing. Just I think it's no matter what stage you're at, but don't be embarrassed to get help. And whether it's, I mean, there's some great podcasts out there. There's Sex Chat for Christian Wives. There's The Naked Marriage. There are other things. There are books out there that you can read. I know, actually, not specifically on sex, but just in conversation, you've actually sent me like links to here. You're in the car together. Here are 50 or 100 questions. Ask each other questions. Like, go to resources. Go to a couple who has a marriage that you admire and seek guidance, seek mentorship. Talk to them. Like, don't think that you're the only person in the world who has this problem or this misunderstanding. There's nothing new under the sun, as Ecclesiastes tells us. Right. And like, seek out the resources. In this day and age, we have such access. You don't have to go through any of this on your own.
Yeah. I think that's a big ploy of the enemy, is to make you feel alone or embarrassed about it, that you can't even talk about it because it's so taboo or whatever. You know, I think a lot of Christian people have problems, especially with sex, is that they've been told it's dirty, it's whatever. The parents didn't want to talk to them about it. And so there is this fear or this, even a little dirty, right? And this is your spouse. This is who you're supposed to be naked and unashamed with. Right. And sometimes we can't even get to that point ourselves. And I think it's important, like you said, to find help, find encouragement, find people who have navigated and been through those situations, because they can help you. I think that's a good point.
I think that is a good point, right? And all these things, whatever the topic might be in communication, we always want to bring it into the light, right? God is light. And if we bring it out of darkness into his light, he'll help us through it. So great conversation, guys. So we're Chris and Brooke. This is Sean and Lauren. And thanks for joining us on our Love for a Lifetime podcast. We'll see you next time.